March 2020. The world stopped. Airports fell silent. Factories went dark. Restaurants locked their doors. Millions of people lost their paychecks in a matter of weeks. And yet, somewhere in the same skyline, in the same trembling economy, billionaires were getting richer. Not despite the crisis. Because of it. By the end of that same year, the world's wealthiest people had added more than $1 trillion to their combined fortunes. While unemployment lines stretched around city blocks, it felt like a magic trick. A sleight of hand performed on the entire global economy. But it wasn't magic. It had a name. Economists call it the Cantillon Effect. And once you understand it, you'll never look at a financial crisis the same way again. Because the truth is unsettling. Money is not neutral. It does not fall from the sky and land equally on every person's doorstep. It enters the economy through a door. And whoever stands closest to that door gets first access to money while it's still worth the most. By the time it trickles down to everyone else, its value has already started to erode. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is not a fringe idea whispered in dark corners of the internet. It is a 300-year-old economic principle, named after a man most people have never heard of. A man who wrote about money, risk, and inequality, and then vanished from history in the most mysterious way imaginable. His name was Richard Cantillon, and his ideas are quietly shaping your financial life right now. Every time a central bank prints new currency, every time a government launches a stimulus package, every time markets are rescued during a crash, the same invisible mechanism activates. Some people get richer, quietly, early, enormously. Others simply watch their savings by a little less than they used to. No headlines, no scandal, no smoking gun. Just a slow, structural redistribution of wealth, built directly into the plumbing of the modern financial system. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand exactly how this works, where it came from, how it operated in 2008, how it operated in 2020, and why it will operate again in the next crisis, whether anyone admits it or not. This is the story of the mechanism hiding inside every dollar, every euro, every unit of currency you've ever held. The mechanism that decides who gets rich during a crisis and who gets left behind. To understand the Cantillon effect, you first have to meet the man who noticed it. Richard Cantillon was not a professor, not a politician, not a theorist locked away in a library. He was a banker, a speculator, a man who understood money because he had made, and nearly lost, a fortune with it. Born in Ireland in the late 1600s, Cantillon eventually made his way to France. And in France, he witnessed something extraordinary, an economic experiment unlike anything the world had seen before. It was called the Mississippi Bubble. A Scottish economist named John Law had convinced the French government to let him create a new national bank. A bank with the power to print paper money, backed, supposedly, by the future riches of French territories in North America. At first, it worked like magic. New money flooded into the French economy. Stock prices soared. Ordinary citizens became paper millionaires overnight. But Cantillon noticed something almost no one else did. The new money wasn't reaching everyone at the same time. The insiders, the bankers, the politicians, the early investors close to Law's system, received the new currency first. While prices were still low, they spent it. They invested it. They bought land, businesses, and shares before the broader public even realized new money existed. By the time that same money reached ordinary bakers, farmers, and laborers, prices had already begun to climb. The insiders had grown rich purchasing yesterday's prices. Everyone else was left purchasing tomorrow's inflated ones. Cantillon didn't just witness this. He acted on it. He used his insider position to short the bubble he saw coming, and profited enormously when it finally collapsed in 1720. The Mississippi Bubble wiped out fortunes across France, but it left Cantillon with a theory that would outlive him by centuries. He wrote it down in a manuscript called Essai sur la nature du commerce in general, an essay on the nature of trade in general. In it, he made a claim that was radical for its time. New money is never neutral. Its effects depend entirely on who receives it first. This idea contradicted the simplistic view most people held, and many still hold today. The view that printing more money simply raises all prices equally, like a rising tide lifting every boat the same amount. Cantillon argued the opposite. The tide does not rise evenly. Some boats are floated long before others even notice the water has changed. And then, almost as suddenly as he appeared in economic history, Cantillon vanished from it. In 1734, his London home caught fire. A body was found inside, burned beyond recognition. Officially, Richard Cantillon was declared dead, but rumors persisted for years that he had staged his own death to escape enemies and disappear with his fortune intact. The mystery was never solved. What remained, however, was his essay, passed quietly among economists for decades after his death, studied by later giants of economic thought, who recognized that Cantillon had identified something fundamental, something that didn't just apply to 18th-century France, something that would apply to every modern economy that has ever printed a single new unit of currency. Today, economists have a name for what he described: the Cantillon Effect. And nearly 300 years later, it is more relevant than ever. Let's strip away the history for a moment and look at the mechanics. Because once you see the machinery underneath, you can never unsee it again. Imagine an economy as a room full of people. Every person in that room holds a certain number of dollars. Those dollars represent their claim on the goods and services available: houses, food, cars, land, everything for sale in that room. Now imagine someone secretly doubles the amount of money in that room. But instead of handing it out equally to everyone, they hand the new money to just a few people standing closest to the door. What happens next? Those few people are suddenly holding far more cash than before. But the goods in the room haven't changed. There isn't more land. There isn't more housing. There isn't more of anything real. Only more money chasing the same amount of stuff. So the people who receive the new money first do something logical. They spend it. They buy assets. They buy property, stocks, businesses, while prices still reflect the old, smaller money supply. They are, in effect, shopping before the sale ends. But as that money moves through the room, from the first hands to the second, to the third, to the 10th, prices along the way begin to rise. Sellers notice more cash circulating and gradually raise what they charge. By the time the new money reaches the last people in the room, often workers earning fixed wages, retirees on fixed incomes, savers with cash in the bank, prices have already gone up. They receive the same number of new dollars everyone else did. But those dollars now buy less than they used to. This is the heart of the Cantillon effect. It is not that money creation is inherently evil. It is that money creation is never distributed evenly and never distributed instantly. There is always an order of arrival. And in modern economies, that order is not random. It follows a very specific path. In today's financial system, new money almost never appears as physical cash dropped from helicopters. It is created by central banks, institutions like the Federal Reserve in the United States or the European Central Bank in the Eurozone. These institutions create new money electronically and inject it into the economy through the financial system. Specifically, through large commercial banks, government bond markets, and major financial institutions. These are the people standing closest to the door. They receive newly created money first, often in the form of cheap loans, or by selling government bonds back to the central bank at favorable prices. With that fresh capital, banks and large investors do exactly what Cantillon predicted 300 years ago. They buy assets while prices are still low. Real estate, stocks, corporate bonds, entire companies. Asset prices rise first, often dramatically, long before the cost of everyday goods like groceries or rent begins to climb for ordinary households. This explains a pattern that confuses many people. Why do stock markets often surge to record highs during economic downturns, while unemployment and hardship spread among ordinary citizens? It isn't because the economy is secretly thriving. It's because the newly created money reached asset markets first. The people who already owned stocks, real estate, and businesses saw the value of those assets inflate. Meanwhile, the people who owned little more than their labor and their paycheck waited in line, the very last stop on the money's journey. By the time it arrived, its purchasing power had already been diluted. This is why the Cantillon effect is sometimes described as a hidden transfer of wealth, not through taxation, not through outright theft, but through proximity. Proximity to the source of new money. It rewards those who are already positioned inside the financial system and quietly taxes those who are not. Understanding this mechanism is the key to understanding nearly every major financial crisis of the modern era. Because when crisis strikes, one policy tool gets used again and again. Money creation on a massive scale. And every single time, the same pattern quietly repeats. September 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed. The largest bankruptcy in American history. Credit markets froze overnight. Banks stopped trusting other banks. The entire global financial system teetered on the edge of collapse. Central banks around the world faced an impossible choice. Let the system fail and risk a depression that could last a generation, or flood the system with new money and hope it would hold the structure together. They chose to flood it. The Federal Reserve launched a program that would later become infamous. Quantitative easing. In simple terms, the central bank created new money electronically and used it to buy financial assets, primarily government bonds and mortgage-backed securities. Trillions of dollars, created not by printing presses, but by keystrokes. Where did that money go first? Not into the pockets of laid-off factory workers. Not into the accounts of families losing their homes to foreclosure. It went into the banking system. Into the balance sheets of the very institutions whose risk-taking had helped cause the crisis in the first place. With fresh capital, banks stabilized. Financial institutions began buying assets again. And slowly, something remarkable happened. The stock market began to recover. By 2013, major stock indices had not only recovered their pre-crisis highs, they had surpassed them. Corporate profits climbed. Asset values soared. But for millions of ordinary Americans, the recovery felt like a rumor happening somewhere else. Wages remained stagnant for years. Median household income took nearly a decade to fully recover. Homeownership rates fell and stayed depressed long after the crisis technically ended. The people closest to the new money, banks, large investors, asset holders, recovered first and recovered enormously. The people furthest from it, wage earners, renters, the unemployed, recovered last and recovered least. It was Cantillon's 18th-century Paris, replaying itself in 21st-century America. Then, in 2020, the pattern repeated. Faster, and at a scale never seen before. When COVID-19 shut down the global economy, central banks did not hesitate. They had already written the playbook in 2008. In a matter of weeks, the Federal Reserve created more new money than it had during the entire response to the 2008 crisis. Interest rates were slashed to nearly zero. Asset purchase programs expanded to unprecedented size. Governments issued stimulus checks directly to citizens, a genuine attempt to reach ordinary people first, this time. But even alongside those direct payments, the larger river of new money still flowed first through financial markets. And the results were almost too perfectly Cantillon to believe. While tens of millions of people filed for unemployment in a matter of weeks, stock markets, after a brief and brutal crash, rocketed to record highs within months. Home prices surged. Tech stocks soared. Speculative assets of every kind, from cryptocurrencies to collectible sneakers, exploded in value. The wealthiest individuals on the planet, many holding enormous portfolios of stocks and real estate, saw their net worth increase by staggering amounts within a single year. Meanwhile, small business owners closed their doors permanently. Renters fell behind on payments. Grocery bills quietly crept upward. The gap between asset owners and wage earners didn't just persist. It widened, in real time, in full public view. None of this required a secret plot. No group of bankers met in a smoky room to plan it. It happened simply because of proximity, because that is how the mechanism has always worked, since Cantillon first described it in the ruins of a French financial bubble. The money goes somewhere first, and wherever it goes first, wins. There is a tax that appears on no government form, no line item, no official rate, no April deadline. Economists call it many things: monetary debasement, inflationary drift, the hidden cost of currency expansion. But its effect is simple and brutally consistent. It quietly transfers purchasing power away from people who hold cash and fixed incomes, and toward people who hold assets. Consider two people living through the exact same decade. The first is a retiree living on a fixed pension with savings held mostly in a bank account. The second is an investor holding stocks, real estate, and business equity. Both experience the same round of new money entering the economy, but they experience it in almost opposite ways. The investor watches his assets appreciate. His stocks rise. His property value climbs. On paper, he grows wealthier with every cycle of monetary expansion. The retiree watches something different happen. Her pension stays the same number on paper. Her savings account still shows the same balance. But every trip to the grocery store quietly tells a different story. The same dollar amount buys a little less than it did the year before. Her wealth hasn't been taken through legislation. No politician voted to reduce her savings. It has simply been diluted. Slowly, invisibly, legally. This is why the Cantillon effect is sometimes called the most invisible tax in modern economics. It requires no vote, no new law, no visible authority raising a rate. It operates silently in the background of every currency, every expansion, every so-called rescue package. And it disproportionately affects the people least equipped to protect themselves from it. Those without access to financial markets. Those without spare capital to invest in assets. Those living paycheck to paycheck, with no cushion to convert into stocks or property before prices rise. Meanwhile, those already positioned inside the asset economy don't just survive these cycles. They often emerge from them wealthier than before. This is not a statement about good people or bad people. Cantillon himself was not a moralist. He was an observer. He simply noticed that structure matters, that position matters, that proximity to the source of money matters more than almost anything else in determining who benefits from a financial system. And once that structure exists, it repeats itself, crisis after crisis, regardless of who is in political power, regardless of which country, regardless of the specific policies used to justify the new money. Some economists argue this is a necessary cost. That without rapid monetary intervention, financial crises would spiral into far greater catastrophes. Mass bank failures, prolonged depressions, complete collapses of credit. Others argue the invisible tax has grown too large, too frequent, and too concentrated in its benefits, fueling inequality that now threatens the long-term stability of the very system it was meant to protect. Both sides agree on one thing. The mechanism is real. The only true debate is what, if anything, should be done about it. And that question brings us to the uncomfortable heart of this story. So where does that leave us? Back in that room full of people, holding their dollars, waiting to see what their money is really worth. The Cantillon effect is not a scandal hiding in the shadows. It is hiding in plain sight, written into economics textbooks, discussed openly by central bankers, debated in academic journals for centuries. And yet, almost no one learns about it in school. Almost no one hears about it on the evening news. Because it doesn't announce itself with a headline. It doesn't arrive with a villain or a single moment of collapse. It arrives slowly, quietly, through every stimulus package, every rate cut, every emergency intervention that saves the system from itself. Richard Cantillon saw it first, in the wreckage of a French bubble 300 years ago. And whether or not he truly died in that London fire, his idea never did. It resurfaced in 2008. It resurfaced again in 2020. And somewhere, in some future crisis not yet named, it will resurface once more. The question this leaves us with is not simply economic. It is philosophical. If money is never distributed evenly, if there will always be those standing closer to the door and those standing farther away, then true fairness may not come from pretending the door doesn't exist. It may come from understanding exactly where that door is. Because knowledge, in this story, is the only form of proximity available to everyone. You may not control when the next $1 trillion gets created, You may not decide who stands first in line to receive it, but you can understand the mechanism. You can see the pattern before it repeats. And in a system where information has always been the quiet advantage of the few, understanding how money truly moves may be the closest thing to standing near the door yourself. Richard Cantillon wrote his essay In the Ashes of One Bubble. We are still living inside the truth he uncovered. The rich do not always get richer during a crisis by accident. They get richer because of where they are standing when the money arrives. The only remaining question is where you choose to stand next time.